5 અને 9 11. હા એટલે પપ્પા 5 8 હતા.
A very good morning to all of you. Let's begin the session with ICI motto. Request Shehzad Bhai to start the ICI motto.
य एष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति य एष सुप्तेषु जाग्रति कामं 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 कामपुरुषो पुरुषो निर्मिमाणः निर्मिमाणः तदेव शुक्रं तद्ब्रह्मा तद्ब्रह्मा तदेवामृतमुच्यते अस्मिन् लोकः शतः सर्वे तदूनात्यधिकश्चनात्यपि एतद्वैता 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 एतद्वैता.
Welcome back. A very good morning to CA Fenil Shah in absentia. The chairman is in Dubai and he might join, and I was waiting for him in fact. Convener for the Women Empowerment Committee, CA Tulsija Jinaya, CA Jhalak Parikh. Other coordinators and committee members of Women Empowerment Committee, Kruti, Nisha, Hinal, I can see almost everyone, Disha, Shikha, and the esteemed speaker for today, CA Sandhya Sriram. What a lovely morning. I'm sorry for the delay, but yes, everyone was dressing up and finding out, let me start at the right time. But yes, we are glad that many of us are with us today. And my dear students, I welcome you to this third session on Kaleidoscope, the journey within. After the first two sessions being very successful, we have kept this session very interactive. And even the faculty was very keen that I would like to talk with the audience. This is the last session before Diwali and we have received many good feedbacks and will continue this series post Diwali as well. And we have esteemed speakers like Sandhya Sriram and many other speakers who are joining with us post Diwali. So keep the momentum there, and I again urge all the audience to be there. In fact, the defining moment at this point of time, you can see the news that women's success is in the air. Whether it is the history as the mother-daughter crew at SkyWest Airlines. Today I got news that IAS Umal Khair, who battled the bone disorder living in slum area, cleared the IAS exam in first attempt. Whether it is the news of Harpreet Singh as the CEO of Air India's regional subsidiary, Alliance Air, for the first time in history. Whether it is the Jacinda Ardern, the New Zealand Prime Minister, elected for the second time. Whether it is Claudia D. Solomon elected as the first woman president of the ICC International Court of Arbitration in the history of 100 years. And I believe that it is rightly said by Shirley Sandberg, the author of Lenin and my favorite, in the future, there will be no women leaders. There will just be leaders. So, my dear friends, tomorrow's world is of women. Whatever field you are, so let's gear up, sharpen our tools, build our tribe, and forget wo char log kya kahenge. So without taking much time, I again welcome the esteemed faculty for today. And with this food for thoughts, let's begin this beautiful series. I'll just share the modalities of the session today. We'll have the Sandhya ma'am will speak for 15-20 minutes, and then we can have an interactive session. The audience is free to ask any questions. And I would now request CA Kruti Samani, the committee member for WMEC, to introduce the esteemed faculty for today. Thank you. Wish you all happy Diwali and happy New Year in advance, and wish you all happy session. Thank you.
Hello. Hi, am I audible? Yes. Thank you so much, Anjali ma'am, for the honors. A very heartily good morning to each one of you. Women can be a CEO, entrepreneur, philanthropist, and whatnot. Her compassion and innovation let her achieve great things and inspire the next generation. It is well said by Estee Lauder. I never dreamed of success. I never dreamed of success. I worked for it. Same thing reflects in our today's speaker. Please help me welcome a superwoman from our own fraternity, CA Sandhya Sriram. Sandhya is the global head of audit and risk for Wipro Enterprises. Before this, she was with Wipro Technologies at global head of finance for customer business unit. Prior to joining Wipro, Sandhya worked close to a decade and a half with Unilever in various roles, including business partnering, controllership, shared services, IT, project management, supply chain, finance, etc. She was placed in India's top 100 women in finance by AIWMI in March 2019. She has been awarded the CACFO Service Sector in February 2015, CACFO Women in 2014, and CA Professional Achiever Women in March 2013. In 2011, an alumni of ICAI, she ranked all India rank in Foundation, Inter, and CA final level examination. Sandhya is the regular speaker at national and international conferences of ICAI and CFO Forum on various topics. A mother of 13-year-old, Sandhya looks at passion as the key to professional success and personal gratification. So, ma'am, we are now very eager to hear you out. Please enlighten us with your wisdom. Ma'am, over to you now.
Thank you, Anjali. Thank you, Kriti. You've just made me very conscious by using a lot of big words, which are truly undeserved.
No, ma'am, it's not like that. You actually proved that.
Thank you for the very warm welcome. So what I will do over the next 15-20 minutes is take you through a little bit about my career journey. What are the different types of roles I did, and what were the learnings in that journey. And then, I'll be happy to take an interactive, we can, you can ask questions and we can talk. And so to start with, after I finished my CA through the campus, I got placed in Hindustan Lever. And so I really, if I have to say, the foundation for my career is my CA qualification, not just from a point of view of, the campus placement and, but it's just that the curriculum is so well entrenched. It gives you education, it also gives you experience, it also builds soft skills. So for example, I was part of the SIRC chapter, and therefore I used to be volunteering in SICASA. And when I think back, a lot of my personality development has not happened because of, while of course my work experience has helped me, but my foundational build has come owing to my career with the CA course, owing to my progress with the CA course only, whether it is volunteering for SICASA, whether it is attending conferences. Really, I got a 360-degree perspective, and I owe a lot to the CA degree. And therefore, I'm always very, very happy to be part of any forum which has chartered accountants on them, because it's like going alma mater, and I feel very happy. So I'm again grateful for having me here. So from there, of course, I got placed from the campus into Hindustan Lever. I did a year as a management trainee. Post that, I became the commercial manager for 2 coffee factories, Mysore and Hosur, and 4 third parties which were attached to the coffee factory. So the role of a commercial manager is accounting, payments, factory operations, cost management, factory taxation management, operation, store warehouse management, etc. So that's broadly the role of a commercial manager. Of course, controls, all of that goes without saying. So for me, I think one of the foundational learning happened in that role, where when you land there, as a chartered accountant, you're landing in a factory, and you're, wanting to make a big difference from a financial value addition point of view. So, what are the costs? Where can I, where are the optimizations on cost available? Where do I, what can I do? Yes, you really go with that tremendous energy. But then the factory manager told me, Sandhya, all the work that you do, you could be a fantastic, cost leader. You could be, I was responsible for SOX implementation in the factory. And in fact, the implementation that we did for the foods business was nominated as best in all of Unilever, across 100+ countries. So, you could be the best in SOX implementation, you could be whatever, but really all that matters is that the truck has to leave the factory on time, in full, and reach the customer or the consumer. It really, really stayed with me. The purpose of what we do. Many times we get very carried away by our limited role in the overall scheme of things, saying, I am an accountant, I am an auditor, I am a treasurer, my role is cash, my role is accounting, my role is controls. But that's really not true. What we are in an organization is the larger purpose. And it has, every time I have taken any role in my life, that's always stayed with me to say, in the overall scheme of things, what is it that matters and where do I stand? And so that's on my factory role. Then I moved into supply chain finance. So this was for the foods business. We had about 50+ units across the country, and I was responsible for accounting, procurement negotiations. I was responsible for payments. I was responsible for monitoring, controls, technical efficiency. I was responsible for third-party management. We had a lot of third-party contract manufacturers, so we had to do their management of the operations of the third party, as well as the contract execution of the third party. So that was that role. So for me, one of the learnings from that role was to see anything that we take to the end. So there was one of, at that time it was the regime of excise. And there was also a lot of interpretation that one could do in how you value your products, etc. And there was certain tax positions that we took, after careful consideration, etc. But obviously, when you go through, it was this bright idea. I went to the tax head, I did a lot of research, and I said, look, I have now come here and I've got this idea. So he asked me, saying, the idea doesn't count as much as do you have it in you to see it through. I didn't understand what he meant at the time. Then I said, what is there? We have all the law behind us. We are doing the right thing. So what's the big deal? But when took we went through with it, the excise officers first started with saying, stop your dispatches. Because I think, we have to understand this. Then you got the show cause notices and all that comes with it. And it took us almost 6 months to a year. Finally I think we won at appeals or whatever. We won it. But seeing that through is the amount of effort it took. There were so many days I would just be camping in front of the excise office just to ensure that the dispatches don't stop and we are able to explain our positions well. So what I really learned from that is that many times, we all of us have many bright ideas, but seeing through an idea is really where the devil is, and whether we have it in us to take it to a logical conclusion and see the outcome through, and whatever comes in our way, we need to stand and fight it, or go through the journey. So that was a big learning from that stint. Then from then on, I moved on to a stint was for as the SAP track lead. So what the role meant was that HUL was going through an SAP implementation journey. And as part of the project team, they had business and IT track leads. The role of the business track lead was to look at what is the requirement of the business, explain it to the IT team, build the design with the business, and then execute that design. So when I started this role, it was about, I think, 4-5 months into the role. I think it was also that time I had just come back from maternity, and I had a colicky baby, and he always used to keep me awake in the night. He always used to have colic pain and keep me awake, and most of the time I had to keep him on me and keep trying to put him to sleep, and therefore there were a lot of nights where I couldn't get sleep. So I thought, why not use this time more effectively? So I used to read a lot of SAP books at that time. You're up till 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock. Why not read? So that helped me understand technology better. So in 5-6 months time, I went back and said, can I take over also the IT track lead? So from being the person who defines the business requirements for technology, I went on to learn IT, and I went on to do the technology design. So I had a group of technology implementers who used to work with me. I learned a little bit of coding. I used to go through codes myself. I used to go through what type of design we need to put in the tool. So for me, it was a fantastic experience at that time. And I really felt that many times the learning I carried is that most of the time the block is in the mind. Our ability to learn, if we can learn chartered accountancy, we can learn how to send a rocket to space. But it's just that we have to open our minds to learn, and as we put our mind to it, nothing is impossible. And especially today's day, where technology is a key to everything we do, we sometimes inhibit ourselves that, how do I learn technology? You can start with simple stuff. And most important thing about technology is it's not about coding. It's not about which language to use. It's about what business outcome you want. As long as we have clarity on what is the business outcome we want to deliver, you don't necessarily need to know whether you need to do this in Java or you need to do this in C++. You don't need to know that. You need to know what problem I want to solve. You will find 5 people who will come and tell you these are the 5 different solutions, and then you will know which applies to your problem best, and then you can choose that solution. So really, technology is not the monster that we think it is, and it's far more simpler. So after that role, I went on to do a role with financial shared services. So I used to run P2P and R2R for HUL. Now, I think that it was a very interesting role for me because it was a role in which by that time HUL had actually sold their shared services to Capgemini, and therefore I was seconded from HUL to Capgemini. And what I really learned in that role is the value of trust, because Capgemini is the vendor, HUL is the customer, and I'm an employee of HUL, but operating on the roles of Capgemini as a vendor. So I had both hats. I must really give it to the leadership at that time who could trust me with a role which was inherently, on the face of it looks conflicted. But I also learned that in anything we do, it is the trust climate that we build that takes us to whatever we want to achieve. So we got very good outcomes at that time, both from a Capgemini point of view and from an HUL point of view. And I think one of the biggest takeaways for me from that role is if we are honest to the outcome, then there is no conflict, because most of the time, the where we finally want to get to is the same, but sometimes there are different paths. So if we just keep the outcome in mind, the conflict can disappear. So after I did that, I moved into a role which was a business partner for, this was, by then I had finished my stint with HUL and I had moved to Unilever. And my role was a business partner for a new technology center, technology and services center that Unilever was setting up as part of a group called ETS. ETS was a 2 billion euro group who was managing technology and services for Unilever globally. And they were setting up a 2,500 seater center in Bangalore. And they asked me if I want to be the finance person. So the role of the finance person is to build the business case, work with the different service lines that were moving into the center, ensure that the business case is delivered, etc. Now, as part of that role, I realized that you really can't add value if you sit outside the ring and say, I will monitor, I will govern, I will report. So then I asked, saying, can I take over the center build? And to Unilever's credit, they gave me the opportunity to take over project management. So as part of that role, I also took on facility management responsibility. I worked with the architects. I even learned some little bit of CAD and designing as part of that role. We did the floor design, the entire build. It's a 2,500 seater center that stands, people at the time used to call me, the Amma of the center. And I think it was because of my size and my Chennai connections. Because Jayalalitha used to be the chief minister at that time. So, but really, when what I learned is that there is tremendous joy in creation. It obviously used to be very stretched for me because I picked on like 3 roles at that time. I was the finance business partner for the center. I'd also taken a business partnering role for one of the divisions of ETS, which is IT for Asia. And then I picked up the facility build also. But then really when you create something, the joy is it just overcomes every other thing that you could have, you put up with to get there. So after that, I went on to become the global controller for ETS. So I was responsible for both controllership, accounting, and FP&A for this 2 billion euro setup, not the India center, but the global setup. So this role, the most interesting part of this role was that it was a global role. And I had about, it was a large team, but my direct reports were 8 people. And 2 of them were Indians. One was Bangladeshi, one was a German, one was a Brazilian, one was a Australian, and one was from Argentina. And it was like a truly diverse team. And in the course of those 4 years, I had 3 managers. One was Brazilian, one was English, and one was South African. So both, your manager and your team. And the role I had taken over was from a very senior English gentleman who was in the UK, and then they moved the role to India, and then I took that role over. So I realized that this, while we talk so much about, and I'm not wanting to stereotype, but while we talk so much about cultural sensitivity, when you really get into a role like that, you realize how important it is. Even things like what words you use, how fast you speak. So initially, I used to do team meetings with my Brazilian team, and I used to get just blank faces. And I used to feel that, oh my God, I think maybe I'm really, bad as a manager. And then I realized that I was speaking very fast. And, they were finding it difficult, and it took them some time to open up and tell me, saying, Sandhya, can you slow down and speak slowly? And then the way I started doing my team meetings was, I used to ask my manager there that after I speak every sentence, I used to pause, and I used to ask him to ask people if they need a translation, and he used to translate wherever required. Something like that. And the other thing is that, different people, some people take more, if the same problem, the way people look at problem solving is different, and it's not just because of a particular geography, but because of grooming, how they look at stuff. So some people like to look at the problem in a very clinical way, see point A to point B, how do I run? Some people like to look at, go around A to C to D to B to then go to where you want to go. But it is so easy to get frustrated, saying, I'm not getting what I want. But if you take a step back, one of the most important things that I have learned about people, and especially in that role, is everybody wants to do something good. They may have different approaches, they may have different levels of capability, they may have different levels of maturity, seniority, but everyone wants to do good. And the real role of a leader is to channelize the strength of that person to the outcome that we want. So I think that role was very, very energizing for me. And when I after that role, I left Unilever, and I had like some 5 farewells, and I'm still in touch with a lot of my team members. And many times in our careers, we think that, I achieved this, I achieved that. But what we really bring with us are the relationships, are the warmth of the people that we carry with us. And that's really what's valuable. And when we look back at our career, that's what gives us immense satisfaction. So with that, my journey with HUL and Unilever ended, and I moved to Wipro. So in Wipro, I started with as the CFO for consumer business unit. Now, consumer is customers in the space of retail, CPG, travel, hospitality. So for me, from FMCG to technology, obviously was a big change. Also, culturally, they were very different companies. Now, one of the things I learned in my stint with Wipro is that, and is really how impactful finance can be. Because in Wipro, finance plays a role of a co-pilot by the definite, no, that's a very proud term we use. Finance is not a bean counter or a number reporter or an accountant. Finance takes equal accountability for the outcomes of the business, and therefore and it was true with Unilever as well. But this was the role. This was my first role as a CFO, and I could really feel the real meaning of what it means to be a co-pilot. So whether it is, the things like deal structuring, or how we help the business get the outcome, how we navigate outcomes. And one of the big learnings for me on that role is really navigation. Because in a B2C company, while you know your customer, and customer centricity is very key, but the customer is very fragmented, and you see the customer as a group of insights that come, and how do we serve that group. But in a B2B context, the customer is very real, and you can touch and feel the customer. And therefore, as a service provider, how do you navigate outcomes? You can't say that, I am not acceptable to this. The customer always will want more from every contract. So how do you get to win-win outcomes? How do you find the right balance that you also do what is right for the company, but the customer also sees value? And 50 to 70% of the cases, it's not about offering a price cut to the customer. It's really about offering value to the customer. How does the customer see holistic value in the offerings that we are giving to the customer? And I think that's the key to any negotiation, that how do you create tangible and intangible value. So that was a really exciting stint for me. I was in that role for about 4 years. Then after that, I had two options to choose from. One was another larger CFO role within Wipro itself, another group. And then this role of audit head opened up in Wipro Enterprises. Now, Wipro Enterprises are the non-IT businesses of Wipro. It is little less known. We are into FMCG, we are into furniture, we are into lighting, we make hydraulics, we are into aerospace, defense, we are into additive manufacturing, we are into industrial water, we are into industrial automation. We operate in about 60 plus countries. We have manufacturing locations in 30 countries. We have big businesses. We are the second or the third largest soap brand in India. You know, that keeps shifting, but we are one of the largest soap brands in India. We are the largest personal care company in Malaysia. We are in the top 2 or 3 in the segments we operate across many countries. So when the audit head role opened up for Wipro Limited, now one of the biggest questions people asked me was that, look, you've been the CFO of a company, and you know, why do you want to go and pick audit and risks as a role? So I had the 2 reasons why I picked this role. One was that I have always been a line person, which means, you know, I always had the ability to take charge and drive. I wanted to do a staff role where you don't have line responsibility and you have to drive through governance. It is something I'm very uncomfortable with. As a personality, for me, just jump in and make things happen. That was my strength and, you know, in some form USP. So how can I prove it in a role which is governance oriented, you know, and where you don't have authority, you don't have power, but you have to deliver outcomes. So that was one I wanted to put myself through that challenge. The second reason why I chose this role was because I wanted to see if I am a chartered accountant, and you know, can I really go back to, you know, and if the people call you auditor, and I've audited nothing in my life after articleship. You know, so, so can I, you know, go back to my roots and see, you know, I have been an auditor for the, you know, in the true spirit. It might sound funny, but really I wanted to have that experience. So then I took on this role. So I came in here as the audit head. Then I also am the risk head, so I'm responsible for enterprise risk management. As I came into the role, me being me, you know, I also said, why not I take on the ethics charter? So I am the ombuds head for the company. Now, the very important thing about ethics charter is it makes you, you know, many times it is difficult, but it makes you very, very proud of the value systems of the organization you work for. Because, you know, the ethics, when you are heading the ethics team, you really see how black and white the organization is. There is just no gray. There is and I think I'm just very fortunate that I you know, I get to lead ethics for a company like Wipro, which is, you know, there is a group called Ethisphere, which rates globally the most ethical companies in India. There are just in the world. There are just 2 companies in India which come on that list of Ethisphere, and one of them is Wipro. So to really lead the ethics charter in a company like that, and there is just no materiality to it. Is not that is it a 10 rupee thing or a 10,000 rupee thing or a 10 crore thing. Similarly, there is no seniority to the charter. It could be anybody. If it is an ethics issue, then the company takes the same action, whether it is the senior most person in the company or the junior most person in the company. And leading this charter for me has really made me get having groomed in HUL and Wipro, definitely that ethics orientation, it was very high. But then doing it yourself gave me a very good opportunity to to see how satisfying it is to run a charter like that. Obviously, it comes with its own challenges, its own difficulty, because you have to have difficult conversations, ask difficult questions. And I always like to be, like I said, in the ring and be the good person to people. And you are here on the other side, and you have to ask people very tough questions. And so it's a very energizing learning for me. And the other thing I have also been trying to do in this role is help build the digital transformation charter for the company. So of course I can't, because of inherent conflict in my role, I can't assume line responsibility for any activity of the transformation, but I lead from a governance point of view. I lead from a coming up, building the design point of view, from finding the, where we want to go, building the vision, finding the right people who can execute the vision. So that's another one that I jumped into, and that's again very energizing for me. And I think I'm just 1.5 years in this role, and what I've really learned in this role is that no matter which side of the table you are, whether you are on the line side or the staff side, as long as your intent is to create value, you will always find a way to create value. It may be a little different in a line role and a little different in a staff role, but your intent is what determines the outcome that you achieve. I think I have bored you all enough. I should stop now and take questions.
Wonderful, CA Sandhya ji. What a roller coaster ride, and so many new diversified roles you have taken, and I have noted down all my questions. But before I ask, I would request audience to take the lead, and you can just unmute yourself and ask questions.
Good morning, ma'am.
Good morning. Good morning.
So I have a question. Like, you've been to so many organizations now. What are those 5 things you look into your employees, you expect from your employees? 5 characteristics or 5 things.
Okay. Thank you, Gianna, for that question. So I'm a believer in diversity of thought, and I'm not talking about gender diversity, but diversity of thought. So one of the starting things, and fundamental premise I work with is that each person is different. And the minute we start stereotyping people to say, this is what I want from this person, this is what is my definition of a person being successful, and this is my definition of a person being, is a failure, I feel then that we lose the value of the diversity that individual brings to the table. So I am, as a person, I'm very, very flexible to experimenting with people who come with very different backgrounds, very different skill sets, very different orientation, because I feel that each one has a very special value to create. So I'll give an example, and I know I'll come to your answer a bit, Gianna, but maybe this is a example that just came to my mind. So when I was doing this purchase to pay, the record to report role with Capgemini, there used to be a security guard at the entrance, exceptionally warm guy. For every aspect of the anybody needs anything, he will take 10 steps. You will expect him to just make the entry in the entrance ledger, but he will go out of the way. And he once came to me and he said, look, I want to do something else. Now, at that time, we had implemented a certain process which required scanning, and nobody wanted to do scanning as a job. So then I asked him, saying that, why don't you start scanning in it? You want to do something different. Why don't you start scanning? So he started scanning. As he was scanning, he said that, can I, started observing what people were doing with the invoices he was scanning. So he started seeing that people are making, what fields people are choosing. And he was, I think, 7th standard or 8th standard pass. Okay. He said, okay, can you give me an opportunity to processing? So we said, fine, why don't you start processing? Because anyway, everything that gets processed goes for verification. You know how the shared service operation is. First you scan, then you process. This guy turned out to be the best processing person we had. His error rate was 0, and his speed was the highest among all the processors. We couldn't promote him beyond that because he had to then get educated. So we told him, then why don't you take a break and educate yourself? And then of course I moved out and I have not kept in touch. But the point I wanted to drive is that, people have immense talent, and we should not stereotype people into any frame to say, this is what I'm looking from you. But having said that, I think the broad characters that I look for from people is honesty, is being trustworthy. I should also be. And trust is a two-way street. If I am not trustworthy to my people, I can't expect them to trust. I can't expect them to be trustworthy to me. So, being able to trust and hardworking. I don't put tremendous weightage on a person's competency, because competencies can build over time, and there will be something that the person will be good at, and you can always find that avenue. But being wanting to work hard is another thing that I value a lot in people. And of course, positive attitude, because attitude is what determines altitude, as they say. So those are the what I can comes to the top of my mind. Does that answer your question, Gianna?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. It does. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ma'am, I have a question. Uh, hello.
Who's speaking? Can you?
Hetal Kotak, ma'am.
Hetal, yeah. Hi, Hetal. Yes.
Ma'am, we would like to know if you, in your personal experience of facing politics in corporates. It may be good or bad.
Yeah, okay. So, see, politics is a very broad brush word, okay? Now, you can break it into few parts. One can be that where people are driving different agendas. So you want a particular outcome and somebody else wants a different outcome. And therefore, you're continuously pulling in different directions. And sometimes, what it needs is being able to confront that individual and have those conversations. See, what happens is when, I am a believer that our mind is a big playmaster. It amplifies a lot of things in our head. So the minute so for example, say Anjali wants a particular outcome and I want a particular outcome, and I will start building stories in my head saying, this is why Anjali is doing this. This is why she is not, this is why she didn't give the right answer in this meeting. This is why she didn't send that file on time. This is why she's positioning this differently. So even simple things which the person may not have done without any malintent, but in the pursuit of closing their charter, our mind amplifies in our head, because we have already put it in our mind that this person is political and therefore this person has an agenda and therefore this person is going to be wrong. And then every step that person takes, the mind keeps amplifying. So in the first scenario where you have a different agenda and the other person has a different agenda, the way to solve it is to have a heart-to-heart conversation with that person to say, look, why are we doing this? Why are we having this conflict? And sometimes our ego is, Sometimes our ego is a big player in this. It really prevents us from having honest conversations. It blocks us. So to be able to control our own ego, see, the one thing I have learned in life is the only thing you can change is yourself. You can't change your environment. So how much can you change yourself to be successful? So that's first aspect. The second aspect of politics happens is when the other person is not capable. And I'm not wanting to cast any view. You can also be incapable. I could have also been incapable in my outcome, and therefore, but what happens in that case is that the person tries to drag you back or wants to play a particular situation in a way that their inability to perform that is not exposed. It is natural human tendency. Even if you look at our own self, sometimes if we think we cannot accomplish something, it takes a lot for us to own up and say that I don't know how to do this, or I messed up, or I made a mistake. First reaction of the brain is defense. The brain will say, but I did work so hard, I did A, B, C, D, but the outcome that was needed was E. But we will keep justifying to ourselves in our own head saying, but I did this, but I did this. So it happens to everybody. When we find that somebody is not able to, is pulling us, is playing politics because they are not able to achieve something, we have to take the what of that individual out of the equation. How are they behaving? What are they doing? That we have to take out of the equation and say, what is the outcome? With only so much coming from this individual, what is the best way I get to that outcome? So that's another way. Now, obviously, if at some point in time you are finding that the whole thing is very obstructive and you are not able to make progress, then you have to find the right escalation in a polite way and get your way cleared, because you can't keep getting stopped. But the biggest learning for dealing with organizational politics is that we have to start with us. We have to see what we can change. We have to see what mistakes we are making. It can never be that the noise comes with just one hand. That it always takes two hands to clap. Somewhere our ego is also playing a part in that politics. And how do we pull back on that ego, and how do we deliver outcomes? So that is the way to deal. But it's a tough one, Ma. It's not straightforward, Hetal. And different people deal with different politics at different points in time. And the one thing we have to set ourselves as our goal is to make progress. So whatever is if I'm walking on a straight road, I will walk at 10 kilometers per hour. But if I'm walking on a hilly road, I can only walk at, say, 3 kilometers per hour. But my goal is to keep walking. I can't let the condition stop me. Whatever I can walk in that condition, I should put my best effort to walk and see how I can then untangle the condition and make it congenial for me.
Thank you so much, ma'am.
Yes. Thank you for the question.
Sandhya ji, we have 2-3 questions in the chat box as well. I would like to read. Should I read it for you?
Yes, I think it's good for everyone. Read it.
Okay. There is this Radhika. You being an extraordinary student in your academics, what about average people? How should they pace in their careers?
Actually, I have come to believe that this academic excellence and all of that is totally overrated. Okay, I think somewhere organizations at some point in time needed a filter for hiring people, and therefore they said rank holder is here, non-rank holder is here. Now the world is changing. It is changing slowly, but it's changing. I don't think anybody's academic achievement determines the altitude that they get to. What determines is what you do with what you get, and how you then build on that. I know you can tell me saying that you had a rank, so you easily got it through campus, and so it's easier for you to speak now. I know it's but I have, through my career, because I also hire a lot of people. So I'll give an example. There was this boy in in the CA campus. He came for the interview, I'm not talking about his qualification or whatever. I'm just talking about he came from a background where he didn't study in English medium, and he knew all the answers, but in the interview he froze. He couldn't just explain himself. Then we kind of calmed him down. We said we were two people in the panel, and at some point in time I was doing a translation of the same question which the other panelist was asking to him in a more softer way, so that it builds his confidence. But inherently that boy was intelligent, and then we said we will take a chance with him and we'll bring him on board. And believe me, it is one of the best decisions I have made. He, within 6 months in the role, he took up responsibility that people like 5-6 years senior to him were struggling to deliver. In 6 months, the grasping power of that boy was amazing. And his ability to simplify problems, the speed at which he used to deliver outcomes, it was outstanding. And as he started creating value on the job also started, people also recognize when someone does outstanding performance, it reflects. So he moved fast, his salary moved fast, he grew well in the company. He's really very highly rated. So sometimes we believe that I have to be exceptionally strong academically, and then that builds the thing. Maybe unfortunately, the way our system is designed today, it weighs a little more on the academic side. But it is once, if assuming that wherever you've started with, the speed at which you build is your own. And I don't have to tell you how many stories are there of entrepreneurs who were unsuccessful from an academic point of view, but they've really built a fantastic career for themselves, built large companies. And all of those stories, if you ask, the bottom line, it is that what they could do with the opportunities that were given to them. So I would really not place significant importance to academic brilliance. And incidentally, my son says that all your knowledge is bookish. He keeps telling me that, keeps rubbing it in, saying, I won't study the way you studied. You are a very bookish person. That's not what the world is, and he's just 13 years old. So
yes, ma'am. There is this another question again. It is very common, but yes, very close. What were the challenges you faced as a woman, if any, balancing personal and professional life?
Okay. So see, I normally, this is a very standard question that people ask, but what I want to say is that let's not overplay in our mind that, a woman faces more challenges, men face less challenges. Think about it. Everybody's life has its share of challenges, its share of pain, its share of difficulties, and everyone balances out. So sometimes, so let's say I'm gender agnostic. There are many people who have this Monday to Friday job where they actually go to a different city because their family is in one place, they are in another place. So they leave on the Monday morning, take a really early morning flight, land there, live on your own, cook on your own, go through tremendous struggle, come back again Friday, meet the family, then again run back. Isn't that a difficult life? There are many people who, and it's not the right comparison, but just for this sake of impact, there are many people who have physical disabilities, but they still do fantastically well. You look at Paralympics, and you see the grit that each of those participants have. What are we? We have a family, we have children to manage, and we have work to manage. So I'm not saying it's not difficult. I am just saying let's not overplay. Everybody's life has its own share of challenges, has its own share of accomplishments, has its own share of failures. And it's all a balance. When they say when you ask for the life of a person, ask for it in entirety, because only then many times we feel that, oh, this person has a very successful professional career, oh, this person has a very supporting family, she has her mother or mother-in-law who takes care of her children, so she is able to do this. Or, oh, this person has a very supporting spouse. You have to look at a person's life in entirety. You don't know what that person goes through, what that person battles. You have your own challenge, share of battles, they have their own share of battles. The only thing that is going to take us be successful in this journey is our own will to succeed. Now, the other aspect of this is that what do we deem as success? Now, success is what it is to our own eyes. Now, sometimes we draw definitions of success from what it is for other people. A person who has reached a particular level in an organization, you feel is more successful than a person who's doing something else, which is not true. Designation, money, whatever, paparazzi, none of it are definitions of success. Definitions of success is what can we accomplish, and are we satisfied or happy with what we accomplish? We are all successful. So if we re-look at our own definition of success differently, then our own this contrast and compare, saying this person is doing that, I am not able to do this, etc. That itself, if it goes away, I think we'll be far more happier, and we'll be able to deliver more outcomes. That's my. I know it doesn't answer your questions in a straight way, but that's what I feel.
Absolutely, ma'am. Sometimes we over exaggerate our problem, as I feel too.
Excellent, ma'am. I have a question.
Yeah,
Uh,
Sandhya ji, I just want to ask you something. Like you said, you described your diversified roles throughout your journey. That is obviously that is so inspiring. But during that phase, as we all are facing, few incidents or something which give inspiration to us, like the challenges you faced, which were the times when you thought that no, this cannot be done, but you come up of that and you face that boldly. Some type of that experience we just want. Can you please share with us?
Nisha.
If you have, if you don't have, that's fine. But normally, see what is happening. We think our problem is like this. Others are not facing, like those who are at this position, as somebody said that you are you have this mind, but if those who are not having, what to about them? So there are such situations in everybody's life. So how to overcome with that? So if we come to know such type of situation, it would be a good guide for us to overcome that.
Sure. So maybe I'll take a little bit of a personal example here. So there was a point in time where so I was living with my in-laws, and normally me and my spouse plan in a way that both of us don't do work trips together. So if he's traveling, I will be in Bangalore, and if I'm traveling, he is in Bangalore. So we always plan like that. But this time, what happened was that my spouse was in the US, and I had an unavoidable 2-day trip to Singapore, and it was just not possible to avoid it, because it was a global thing, and there were a lot of people that got tied up, and I got picked up for it in the last minute, and I had to go. So he was in the US, and I was in Singapore, and at that time my father-in-law had a I think a nerve burst in the brain or something like that, and my mother-in-law was left alone. with the child. There was a grandmother at home, my husband's grandmother. She was there at home, and my mom was there, because whenever I travel, my mom comes, so that if there's somebody with them. And she, poor thing, she really struggled. She had to get an ambulance. She didn't know what to do, where to take him. And then he's admitted in the hospital. And I get a call in the night. It was Singapore time, some midnight, 11:30 or so, and I get a call saying he's hospitalized. And then I'm just running to the airport, trying to find a flight to come back, and then all that thing. And same thing for my husband. He had to change some 5 flights from the US because he couldn't get a direct flight to come to Bangalore. And during that time, when both of us were rushing, the doctors are saying that he's collapsing, and they're not going to be able to save him. And my mother-in-law is left all alone here. And finally, I reached. Literally, neither he nor I would have slept for 3 days, because I was trying to get back. He was trying to get back. I reached faster because I was in Singapore. And by the time we reached, they couldn't save him. Of course, we did get to meet him, but then he was already in coma, and we couldn't save him. So for the longest time, we always used to feel guilty that, could it have happened differently? And there are always going to be situations in your life where things are just beyond your control. I still feel guilty, but beyond a point, that's what life is. You will have things that you can't control. You will have things that you can't really, you could have influenced. I still feel that maybe if I was there, she would have been more confident, to take him to the hospital or whatever. But well, it is what it is. At some point in time, we have to learn to live with the guilt. Now, after that, obviously, we've come what may, we never travel, but whatever it is, and move on with life, and carry that guilt so that it makes you a more wiser person, a better person, and influences your decisions better. So in our life, we'll have many such examples, sometime in the work front, sometime in the personal front. And all those experiences just make you who you are. So we have to take them as, the small, little tiny dots that make that full picture. Take it as one more, maybe a painful memory, a dot, but move on with it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but
these type of little bit things are there which inspires us. Some moments that just keeps in our mind, and they inspire us if such type of moments are happening in our life. Really touched to know about you, and I think there is no feeling like you should not feeling guilty about it, because you tried your best. So but you were right that if that guilty is there in mind, we are obviously cautious in the future. Thank you very much, Sandhya ji.
Hi, hi Sandhya ji. This is Kusumanjali. I had a question that like for the aspiring people, like who are just new chartered accountants, freshers, and how do they decide exactly, like what did you look at when, like the question is in two parts. First thing, like what did you, like did you do your SWOT analysis and actually where should I go? Did you put in so much thought, or you just went ahead with what has come? Because actually it becomes very difficult at the start to really decide what is right for us and what is not, and do we go with the flow or we sit and we analyze very rigorously. And the second part is that normally the things which I had gone through is said that industries are normally very monotonous as compared with the consulting world. So since you have been into industry, I think that you would, like, you are the best person who can guide regarding that for as regards industry. So that's what I wanted to ask.
Sure. Thank you for that question, Kusum. The first question which you asked, saying did things happen to you or did you make conscious choices? No, I didn't make too many conscious choices. But the choices I made was when the roles I picked up, I made choices on what I want to make out of those roles. So many of the roles that I picked up didn't come with the definition of what they were. I built those roles. And please don't mistake me. I'm not trying to, say I built like a matter of pride or something. I'm just trying to say as a matter of fact that I uh, what you create out of your roles and what you can accomplish out of them is really in your hands. At least that's how my life has been. Having said that, when people ask me this question, saying, so if you're immensely passionate about a particular area, for example, if tax is your calling and you're very passionate about tax, then you must build that specialization in that area because, like they say, if you have, if your passion becomes your work, then you don't have to work a single day in your life. So that's the first filter, which is to say, do I have a very a deep calling to a particular stream? Now, if you don't have a deep calling, you're not very particular that this is where my heart lies, then it is okay to look at certain, take a generalist view, try certain options, see what suits you best, and then make choices. And as you make those choices, the 2 3 filters you may want to apply is that one is, when I make a choice, how am I able to apply myself to the fullest on that choice? So which means that the choices I'm making, it gives me the ability to express myself, and that's a factor of the job, of the culture, or the environment in which you're operating, and your own situation at that point in time, personal situation, emotional situations. It's a factor of all of that. That's one aspect of the choice. The second aspect of the choice is that there is no learning is like an ocean. So there is no stereotype saying that if I've done one role in audit, then my life has to be, I have to be a career auditor. You can always, if that's your passion, if that's something you enjoy to do, then absolutely you should do that. But there is nothing wrong in experimenting and trying different things. Now, the third aspect is that when in life we feel that we are not happy with something, we must cut our losses quickly and find something that gives us happiness. Not get stuck on with something for a very long time and then get ourselves caught in that vicious circle. Now, coming to your second question, which is industry versus consulting versus, I won't say industry has been monotonous or boring. I think it has been the most exciting ride I have had. Consulting will be equally exciting. So if you ask someone who's passionate about tax, they will find tax to be equally exciting. So, what is boring or what is exciting is in our minds. What excites us as individuals? If you feel industry is monotonous, then you try your hand with consulting. The thing with consulting is that in industry, the ability to learn, the learning curve is a little tilted on your side. So for example, when you take on a new role, people give you that 3 to 6 months to find your field, settle down, understand the dynamics, and start contributing. In consulting, you have to contribute from day one, because when you're in front of a client, you can't be learning in front of them. They're calling you in as an expert, and therefore you have to create that value. So which means that if you want to pursue a career in consulting, then you have to build that rock solid base of good conceptual understanding, good practical application. That's when you can step in terms of being be able to contribute in the consulting space. So which means you have to invest time and effort in building that profile for yourself. So it's really, I wouldn't say one over the other. I would definitely say that it's where you think you can play the best role.
Thanks a lot. It answered a lot of. Thank you.
Sandhya, there is a question in the chat box. Now in this time of pandemic, we are not mentally prepared for the death of self or immediate family members, and there is so much uncertainty around. Any tips to face better this uncertainty?
Yes. So Actually, there are two, three aspects to this. Now, one is that um, we cannot overplay the pandemic, and I think it's a little bit of a contrarian response, but we cannot overplay this pandemic in our head. Okay, one of the things why this pandemic is different from, say, so number of people that die of road accidents in this country are far greater than the number of people that lives the pandemic has taken. Now, the reason why the pandemic is getting us so worried about is one, because there is so much hype about it in the circles. The second is that you can't plan for it, and people, we don't like something that we can't plan for. So, for example, if I have not taken care of my health well and then I get a disease and something happens to me, it's a consequence, and therefore, and somehow people learn to live with it. But when just by talking to someone on the street, you could then come back home with something. It's not something we are mentally prepared for. So that also overplays in our head, saying, "Oh my God, where have I, got myself into? Where are we all into?" So that also plays on our head. And the unpredictability, like you said, uncertainty or unpredictability. Now, the only thing I will say is that we cannot overplay. So, for example, the Wipro Enterprises, we've been working from office since May. Now, of course, we're working alternate days. But one of the things that we've always told our people is that, look, we will try to make the environment as safe as possible. And if there is so we ensure complete adequate social distancing. We ensure that people are with their masks all the time. We do all the testing. Now, every day you go to office, you always had, or even when you go to the shopping mall, or you're going to, going down to buy vegetables or whatever, everywhere you go, you're always carrying this fear that, oh my God, what if I bring something back? So there are two things. In 99% of the cases, people are recovering. So if something happens, we need to tell our mind that we will recover. Now, God forbid, if something goes wrong and we lose a dear, there is nothing we could have done to avoid it. It is coming in this form of the pandemic. It could have come in any other form in our lives. We really, one of the biggest mysteries of the human life is that nobody can predict the human life. So we can't let that bog us down emotionally and say, oh my God, there is a pandemic. I can't go anywhere. I've got myself caught in the house. My professional life is getting impacted. Personal life is getting impacted. We have to be as safe as possible and take it in the stride and take it with positivity. Mind has a huge role, and I don't know, we don't know, anybody can get hit with the pandemic tomorrow, and anybody could go through, but that's true for everything. No, you can also get hit with a road accident. One of my close friends, he was standing waiting for a Uber on the corner of the road right next to the footpath, and then there's some scooterist lost balance and hit him. And this guy was a very successful professional, and then he's been now for 2 years, he's been recovering. You can never ever say what's in store in life for us. The only thing we can do in life is take it with positivity, and obviously take all the precautions, etc. I don't know if it's the right answer. It's a contrarian answer or a philosophical answer, but I sincerely believe in that.
Ma'am, I have another question for you. Like, you've been changing so many roles at work. It's not just one job that you've done from start to end. And what we studied and now what we are practicing, be it the taxation or be it the corporate laws, everything has changed. How do you keep yourself updated? Like, you read continuously or you go for different trainings? Like, what do you think is needed in today's space?
Sure. So I do read, but I thankfully, I don't read. I don't have to keep myself updated with company law or tax, because the tax head and the company secretary takes care of that. But I believe that reading is an essential part of building personality, and there are many ways to read. So for example, I when I go for walks, I listen to audiobooks. So, you also take care of your health, and you can listen to a book. Sometimes when I am doing home work, like you're cleaning or you're cooking or you're doing something, just play an audiobook on the side. That's a way to learn. There are a lot of courses, right? The biggest advantage of today is information is so democratized and available. So what I do is, and now, there is just this, like they say, in the day of the pandemic, the biggest epidemic is webinars. There are like webinars every day. I'm also contributing to the epidemic today, but you know, so, and all of them are available in public domain. You can go up to the link. Most of them are uploaded on YouTube. So I also listen to a lot of speakers. I listen to podcasts. So I do. I also try to read books whenever I can. So when I'm traveling, etc. Now, of course, travel has significantly reduced. But when I'm traveling, I use that time to read books. So I feel that reading is and learning is a never-ending journey, and we don't need to restrict ourselves to just technical reading. We can also do a lot of generic reading, self-help reading, because our mind is a very complex animal, and the more diverse thoughts we feed into it, the better it becomes. So I am a big believer that we must invest time in reading, and now it's much more easier than it used to be in the past.
Yes, ma'am. There's a question from Ritu Shah in the chat box.
Sure.
How do we manage to create value in what we do or build up the role? Also, how do we focus on value addition in our role and to ourselves amid cutthroat competition in the corporate and environment where there is a lot of politics?
Yes. So actually, Ritu, your question is your answer. If you ask me, whatever be the competition, like I said before, the only thing you can change is you. And as long as you are focused in creating value and outcomes, you will definitely find a way to beat the prove yourself. Now, because I've spoken about this before, I'll take a little different response here. One is that, see, one of the things that women don't do enough is to be visible. Now, in some form, visibility is a bad word. People say that, oh, he or she is doing it for visibility. It's not about overplaying what you have done or trying to tell things that you have not done or trying to just do classroom participation in every meeting that you are. But it is about, if you have accomplished something, you have to be able to frame it in the right words to the right people so that people know what you've done. And there is nothing wrong in being able to project what you've done to the people that you work for. I am not a big believer that you just put your head down and keep working and somebody will take notice. It's not like that. And I'm not saying that you should crave for visibility, keep going and boasting your trumpet with people. Not that. But there is nothing wrong in sharing what you have accomplished in a humble and polite way from time to time to people that matter. So that's one aspect. Now, the second aspect is intent. Now, our intent has to be the right outcome for the organization, and intent cannot be that what personal agenda for me is it serving. If I do this, will I get a promotion? If I do this, will I get a better increment? If I do this, will my manager think I'm a superstar? If we go with a personal charter, then our outcomes will be biased to that personal charter and people will see through. We have to go with the genuine intent of doing something right. And the best example I can give is what we do for our children. We don't take care of our children because we want them to give us a credit or a plaque that you are the world's best mother or whatever. We do this because we genuinely believe that we want to add value to their life. We want to make them better people. We want to make them more successful, and we don't expect anything in return. Similarly, when we are in our work environment, whatever we do, we have to do from a perspective that what is the right thing to do. Why can't I make the same breakfast every day for my son? Why do I do different things every day? Because I feel it's the right thing to do. Give a different palette to the child, the variety you bring to your work. So you have done something in a particular manner, it's made you successful. Can you do it differently? Can you add more value on that? And the third aspect is that whenever you are confronted with politics in the organization, like I spoke, there is always two sides to the story. Try to clear up your side of the story as much as possible, so that you can dispassionately solve the problems with the other person. You see, people are built over a period of time, and their grooming, framing, you can't change people overnight. And just because you've gone and had an honest conversation, the person won't play the politics again. May or may not happen, but you have to keep trying, and over a period of time, outcome will come. I don't know if that answered your question, but
thanks a lot, ma'am. It did answer it really very nicely. So one point definitely for me to pick up is the keeping the intent correct and doing the right things. So actually, generally, that's what I always find. That we, or maybe it's very specific to me, that we do not show up enough, or voice our contributions, and that's where we lack. So this is also one area that I think we need to improve on.
yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes, thank you.
Yes, ma'am. I have some 2-3 questions. Firstly, it is you can ask that you can answer it in a very quick way. Master of one or jack of all trades? What is your view?
So I think it is the circumstance, the job that. For example, if you take on a role of a specialist, you have to be a master of one. You can't be a jack of all trades. So if you are again, I'll take the same example, a tax specialist, you need to know every nuance of the law and that is to be, so that you can solve problems. But if you have a more generalist profile, then you don't have to kill yourself trying to understand every nuanced thing. Just be able to broadly understand various aspects and create value. So it's really the circumstance of the job that you do. For example, if you've taken a consulting career, people are looking at you for solutions and in your area of niche. So you can't be a jack of all there. You have to be the master of that one area of niche that you bring to the table. That's why you're being called to that table to, to be consulted with. So it is circumstantial, but for me, through my career, because I have not taken such difficult routes, I think jack of all has worked, or jack of few has worked.
Great, great. Another thing which I would like to ask again on behalf of the audience, being in Ahmedabad, we have many practicing chartered accountants. Either they have their own practice or they are a partner. I would, on behalf of them, I would like to ask you, how can we create a brand, since it's a sole proprietor or a partner contributing to the firm? How we do have in Gujarat, the women chartered accountants do have these entrepreneur capabilities. But as far as the risk, taking risk is concerned, facing the uncertainty concerned, or some mind blocks are concerned, they don't take challenging roles, or I say they don't come out of the comfort zone. So I would like to know how can they create their brand you?
Okay, so I think, at the risk of stereotyping, I think chartered accountants in Ahmedabad had the unique advantage that there is a very strong entrepreneurial DNA that runs. It's in the DNA. You look at any of the most successful organizations, you will either have someone from Gujarat at the helm, or will be the CFO, or will be responsible for operations. So and most of the successful businesses created have originated from there. So that's there. That's one. Second is that the penchant for numbers and is very high. The intellectual ability to deal with numbers is very high in Gujarat, Ahmedabad, and the triangulation is that and again, I'm not stereotyping, but women in Gujarat are bold. They speak their mind, they express themselves. So really, you have this triangular benefit of having the right DNA structure, having the right talent for the job, and having the right orientation of being able to express yourself. So there is an inherent advantage. And then the second is the peer group. It's a business community. So therefore, the peer group or the peer area in which you are able to create value, what you bring to the table is valued. To bring your entrepreneurial, financial abilities with the right framing, it's really of value to the business groups there. So therefore, that's the second aspect. What I want to start with saying is that being in Ahmedabad, you all have a natural advantage. Okay. Now, what do you build from there? Now, I think 2-3 factors on building your brand. One is that you may want to then think through where you are able to create maximum value. Now, are you able to create maximum value in, say, business valuations? Are you able to create maximum value in negotiation and getting outcomes for your client? Or are you able to create maximum value in accounting? And then build your niche. If you try to do, I'm also a chartered accountant, I also offer firm, whoever brings me something, I will do it. Then you will always be the generic, which is not wrong. But like I said, success is always in the mind. What you deem as successful is success. If you want to be a CA who caters to 10 different types of customers, 10 different needs, that's also equally successful. But if you want to build higher up the value chain, and that's something that you deem as success, then you may want to then build that capability of what you bring to the table. And then you have to have the courage to stand up and say, I can do it for you, leave it with me. I think what sometimes women don't do is that they don't trust themselves. There is this study which says that when a man is 60% ready for a job, he will apply. And when a woman is 95% ready for a job, she will still be afraid to apply. So I don't want to stereotype, but sometimes you just have to step up and say, look, I can deal this for you. You leave this with me and I can make it happen. So maybe with the natural advantage you have, you can build certain areas where you think you are somebody who can create unique value than anybody else, and step up, go out there and tell them, I can do this for you, give it to me, leave it with me, I'll take care. That's what I would say. And I'm no big person to advise or whatever. I'm just saying what's coming to my mind. You're far more capable leaders who can give you more and specific advice.
Thank you so much. I definitely buy your point that with the kind of experience you have, your work itself was your brand. But in practice, generally you need to market yourself. Of course, the existing client will know your value from your work. But for prospective clients or for the outside world, you need to market your services. And in CA, our code of ethics do not allow for direct marketing. So can you suggest other ways where you can market, not exactly marketing, but where you can show your capabilities or let the crowd know, let the audience know that these are the areas in which I'm working, and some marketing tips like that?
Sure. So one of the ways by which you make your brand known is being a thinker in that topic. So if you have a specialization, then can you write thought papers, articles on them? Can you be a public speaker on that topic? How do you create a brand where people know that, say, if it's something to do with valuation, for me, Anjali is an authority on that, because she knows. I have seen her write papers, I have seen her speak about it. So that's one way by which you make your specialization known. Another way by which you make it known is being able to frame the outcomes that you deliver for your client in a way that your prospective clients see the value. So, for example, many times when you look at pitch decks, which we talk about, and it's a big thing especially in IT services, it's a big thing. You may be doing 100 things for your client, but what IT services company do best is that they are able to synthesize it to top 3 messages that they believe will resonate with that other company. So before we make a pitch to any company, we first study exhaustively what does the business that company is engaged in, what type of IT landscape they have, how have they what are the problems they've had, what are the different type of partners they've worked with, who has worked out for them, who has not worked out for them. We do a lot of ground research on trying to understand the customer. And then when we go to them with specific examples to say, for this problem, this is how we have solved. So our pitch deck is very highly customized. See, people's attention span is not more than 15 minutes. In the first 10 to 15 minutes of the pitch that you make to that person, you need to land the value you can bring to that individual. So doing a reasonable amount of homework on what the needs of the person that you are going to pitch to, and then making a customized pitch on where you think you can add unique value is another aspect. Now, the third aspect is that your brand is as much a factor of what you do, as much as a factor of what your customers talk about you. So which means that if you have your customers standing up to say, so for example, you've done say risk management for me, you should have done such a high quality work for me that next time somebody has a risk management request, you must have the courage to say, I don't need to speak. Just call Sandhya and ask, what did I do for her? That is a very big selling point. If you can create that level of value for your existing customers, that they become your brand ambassadors, and then that then creates that confidence. When someone who has in a similar industry, who has gone through similar experiences, stands up and tells me that, say, you go to Anjali, she'll solve your problem, it gives me tremendous credibility to choose Anjali over somebody else. So that's another way by which you can market yourself. And like I said, I am no authority. I think I'm just saying what's coming to my mind. But yes.
Beautiful, ma'am. We have got many insights, and I'm sure everybody is taking their takeaways. Any other question from the audience? We can take, I think we can take one last question. Yes, Sandhya ji?
Sure. I'm.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Yes, we can have one last question and then we can wind up.
Hello, ma'am.
Who is speaking?
The
Yeah.
that you had been part of implementation. So, as per my job structure, I am also the part of SAP. Hello.
Your voice is not coming clearly, Kruti. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah. So, in your conversation, you mentioned that you had been part of SAP implementation project. Yeah. So, as per my present job, I am also working in SAP shared services. So, I want to know that how it helped you to take further roles and having advantage over other who are not having technical knowledge.
Yes. So I thought, the IT stint was one of the biggest arrows in my armory in some form. It really created a lot of value. Two, three things. One is that it it demystified technology for me, and I now can say for sure how we can use technology for problem solving. That was one benefit. Second is that it brought a process orientation. So I always look at every problem with what is the right process to solve the problem. So I'm not that supermanish person who jumps in and solves it and then it's not sustainable. So a stint with technology brings you process orientation. Third is that it helps you find the simplest way to do the job, because many times we do certain things because we've always done it, or somebody before us has always done it that way. So, and we also feel in some form happy that okay, I am working 10 hours a day, I'm working very hard and I'm delivering an outcome. It doesn't make us think that, do I need to put 10 hours into this job? Can I do it in 1 hour and find something else to do for the next 9 hours? So a stint with technology brings that orientation to say, what is the easiest way to do the job? And can that be automated so that we can invest our energies to do something else? So I feel it was one of the most nourishing stints for me. And across every role, I've been able to use the learning from the stint with technology.
Thank you so much, ma'am. It answered my question.
Thank you. Thank you, Kriti.
Fine. I would now request CA Gianna Tulsija to propose formal vote of thanks on behalf of Ahmedabad branch of ICAI.
Thank you, ma'am. Ma'am, it was a pleasure to have you with us. I'm sure everybody have taken their takeaways. I have mine. Like you said, you should always end something you started, and you should always have an open mind to learning. Like, if we can be a CA, we can even fly a plane. So yeah, and the joy of creation which you taught us. Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you for being with us, and thank you all the participants. And I wish a very happy Diwali and a New Year to everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity. It was wonderful chatting with all of you, and happy Diwali to all of you.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you for sparing your time, and I'm glad that I got your acceptance in the first invite only, and I founded you very grounded and talking to your being so open and transparent to us. Thank you so much from my heart. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you all. Have a happy Diwali and Happy New Year. See you soon with amazing sessions like this post Diwali. Thank you so much.
Bye.